Hi, my name is Josh Hollingsworth, and I'm the Engagement and Exhibitions Manager here at Delaware Contemporary. We're excited to be hosting another segment of On Art Conversations with the Artists. And today we're joined by Kristen and Kristen Taylor, who is an exhibiting artist, and Kristen, who is one of the curators of Through a Glass Darkly. Thank you guys for taking the time out to do On Art and let our viewers dive into a little more about your exhibition, Kristen Taylor, and then Kristen how did Through a Glass Darkly come about? And we're excited to hear from the curatorial aspect as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Josh. As Josh said, I'm Kristen Dede. I'm one of the curators of the exhibition Through a Glass Darkly, along with Jenna Lucente and Alexander Rosenberg. So the exhibition's on display now at the Delaware Contemporary through the end of this calendar year. The exhibit spans across 6 galleries and occupies more than 6,000 square feet and brings together the work of 35 contemporary artists whose work either employs or engages with glass or glass-like materials. So glass is a ubiquitous material that is heavily relied on for the way we navigate our modern world. Even though it's everywhere, it doesn't really get a lot of attention. It's often overlooked, looked through, taken for granted. So one of our primary goals with this exhibition was to bring together a collection of works that really call attention to this invisible material, challenging the viewer to really recognize the material, to see the material through a new lens, and to consider what we see and what we do not. So we're very grateful and excited to have Kristen Neville Taylor here with us today to share her work End of Days. Upon composing and considering the theme and our goals for this exhibition as curators, we pre-selected 4 anchor artists, Kristen being one of these individuals, whose recent work is particularly interesting in relationship to the premise of Through Glass Darkly. And we invited each to participate by either presenting relevant recent works or by creating new work in response to the theme, which is what Kristen did for this exhibition. I'm really excited for everyone to hear from her a little bit more about this. So Kristen is a Philadelphia artist whose diverse practice combines drawing, sculpture, and glass, which converge playfully in installation style environments. Her work considers the impact of the stories we tell about nature, calling attention to the systems and events that establish definitions and shape public perceptions of the environment. She is a co-founder of The Green Sun, a multifaceted project focused on the intersection of art and policy as they relate to the history of energy, energy democracy, and possible energy futures. So I'll let Kristen take it from here. Thank you, Kristen.
No, thank you, Kristen. It was such an honor to be asked to be a part of this show. And I still look around when I think that I was chosen as an anchor artist. It was an exciting prompt. I've always thought about turning my sites to glass as a subject, but hadn't really done it. And it's daunting as someone who's thought about glass for a long time. So I'm really grateful for this past year of, initiating that. And so today I'm just going to give a short talk, about 10 minutes or so, about the installation titled End of Days at Delaware Contemporary. And as Kristen said, my practice mostly focuses on stories that we tell ourselves about nature and the impact those stories have on the way we build worlds or construct the world around us. I'm trained in glass, but also use other materials, tools, and strategies such as drawing, sculpture, interviews, programming, curatorial projects to explore this theme. So I'm just going to share my screen. So this is just a smattering of some past works and a glamour shot with a solar panel. Okay, so in past exhibitions and this current show at Delaware Contemporary, my approach is to trace stories backwards, often through key texts, materials, or subjects, glass in this case, and then to emphasize the connections between the public and private realms. Mary Shelley famously incorporated references to both historical and current events, as well as very personal anecdotes in her novels. And I'm inspired by this, and it gives me permission in a way to include both culturally recognizable stories as well as obscure or personal source material. Another influence of mine is Donna Haraway, who uses what's called implosion theory to trace materials backwards in an effort to tell a nuanced story. Donna says, I have taught a course called Science and Politics for a number of years, and one year, very early in the morning, a big lecture class at 8 a.m. To get to the lecture hall, we all passed this little shop that sold good coffee and chocolate croissants. And just as a way of waking up in the morning, I would ask people to unpack objects, to take a chocolate croissant and lead me through flour and chocolate and butter and sugar and coffee and connect us to world histories that way. I would ask people to pick an object, the t-shirt that the person sitting next to them was wearing, what was printed on it, the label, the very fact of labeling, the fiber composition. If it's got polyester, then take me through the history of Purity Hall and research labs at DuPont. Back me up into nitrogen chemistry. If it's cotton, then back me into pesticides and the California water projects and where cotton is grown and the length of the fiber. And what about what you're wearing on your chest? I would ask people as a way of talking about science and politics to take a pencil, a piece of paper, the architecture of the lecture hall that you walk past, pick something and get the class started by giving me an account of it. So in my work End of Days, I share an account of sand and the circularity of it as a glass material beyond an economic point of view. This is an image from the US Geological Survey of the Berkeley Glass Sand Company, now US Silica, where they've been mining silica sand in West Virginia for over 100 years. I was originally scheduled to visit this site to set my film, but due to the pandemic and personal reasons, I turned my sights to more local sand operations. Sand mining has been and continues to be a prominent industry in nearby South Jersey. I was looking at local archives, geological surveys, and talking to people to gather stories and ideas about sand and glass. This lecture by Nahal El-Hadi was influential in affirming the value of following the sand path. She says, sand is the material that matters most to what it means for us to be human, and our worlds are made out of sand. The USGS records more than 1,000 former and current mining operations in New Jersey state's history. I was floored by this image, I think it's on your right, of the sand mines that essentially make the shape of the state of New Jersey, as if you couldn't walk without tripping over one. The Pine Barrens is a storied place that was home to the early glass industry and hosts many sand mines. In 2016, I co-curated an exhibition in the Pine Barrens, where my initial Pine Barrens research began. I read John McPhee's book, Pine Barrens, but had not thought too much about its relationship to glass at that time. My friend David Kessler, that I co-curated that exhibition with in tandem with his film of the same name, put me in touch with Mark Dimitrov, a geomorphologist who also grew up in the Pine Barrens, where he conducts his current research. This is from our first Zoom call, where he's showing me a rock with a unique wind erosion patterns from the sand. He's very excited. The element of sand mining for glass in the Pine Barrens that was most intriguing was that in the wake of these mines, they leave behind a stunning blue holes, an oasis that many people in the surrounding area use for recreational purposes in spite of the warnings of their danger. I'd lived most of my life not connecting their existence to glass, the industry which had birthed them. My film in End of Days takes place at a blue hole at the Manyumuskin River Preserve in Cumberland County. Here you can see some of the mine ruins. Here we are touring around with Wayne, a retired plumber that now works for the New Jersey Nature Conservancy, and Jamie Robinson, who created the sounds for the video. The sands in the Pine Barrens, also known as sugar sands, are prime material for glass making. But for the sculptures in my show, I worked with an unstable glass formula that is still by definition a glass, but that begins to break down as soon as it is fired. So you can see the raw materials that I'm mixing, and then on the left, Liv is making frit from the molten unstable glass formula. Here we can see the unstable glass stringers, thin threads of glass that have been fused together, then slumped. The bottom object was fired earlier, and so it's starting to break down. And if you can, I don't know if you can see in the details, but it's as if it's shedding as it slowly degrades on the surface. And the top sample is more transparent because it's been fired more recently. But they were both made from the same formula using the same methods. I also found this early note from the beginning of the project on my studio wall that says, unstable glass, breaking it down can be likened to composting. What does the composting of ideas and artworks allow? I wanted to use this material that degrades as a way to think about dissolving current systems. The current way that I work as an artist mirrors a system of extraction. Even if on an individual level it has little impact, in this exhibition, I'm in a way composting my old ways of working as I try to turn towards a more regenerative practice. Because I've been asking myself, how can a process that mirrors one of extraction offer a regenerative alternative? This casting was the first of my unstable glass experiments. It's in the image of this very early pate bear. I wanted to recreate the entire historical glass timeline that I share with students almost by rote as a way to, again, work towards reimagining how I understand and share stories about glass. This glass dome is a kind of worlding project. I've created a series of models from the unstable glass formula based on blueprints and renderings for development proposals in the South Jersey Pine Barrens throughout history. Like this jetport and a megalopolis or giant city. Excuse me. So I'm thinking through land use with the Pine Barrens as a case study and using unstable glass as a metaphor for dissolving these practices and criticism of current approaches to development and building and as a way to start anew. End of days, the title of the show has a dual meaning. End of days were objects made by glass factory workers off the clock at the end of the workday. A series of them is shown here from a book my mother-in-law gave me called American Glass. They were often hats, glass canes, pipes, and some other like silly objects, like you can see like a kind of duck or toy at the top. These items are also known as friggers or whimsies. H.G. Powell in Glassmaking in England defines friggers or end of days as a quote, glass made as an experiment to test its effect or the skill of the craftsman or boy. The unstable glass experiments tie me to the early glass industry workers, as well as for me, when I was making this work, I was pregnant and then had a newborn. So I felt like when I was working on it, I was kind of sneaking in creative projects off the clock at the end of my workday. And so the sculpture on the left is a glass hat that I made in homage to the workers, filled with the unstable glass formula that's meant to appear like strata, like geological strata, and kind of becomes an interior or psychological landscape. It was also important to connect in terms of circularity with the current glass industry. So one of my most significant connections to glass is my father, who was a union glazer putting windows in skyscrapers in the tri-state area. And here he is pictured installing windows in a building in downtown Philadelphia. This is where our sand goes to live or die, depending on how you think about it. And the image on the right is the logo for his local union, which is kind of like lion on its legs, on its hind legs with its fist up. So I created this pair of pate bears, a process that translates from French to mean glass pastes. As to make it, we apply glass pastes inside of refractory molds to form a solid glass object, and they often take on an opaque feel like concrete or stone. In the image on the right, I've drawn a lion in the image of my dad's glazers union. It's called Workers Wake Up, and it's inspired by the loads of workers that were standing up for themselves and unionizing across the country. It's a way to further connect glass art to its industry sibling and their shared history of raw materials, extraction, and fuel. Both images are inspired by one of my favorite artists, Henri Damier, whose father was a glazer too, and who spent his life advocating for workers and everyday people. This is one of Damier's most famous etchings of Gargantua, depicting the French King Louis Philippe being fed sacks of money by servants. The image on the right, the pate bear on the right, is titled End of Days and shows a pair of bathers in a blue hole at night with the moon reflected in the water. I believe that this reuse of the blue holes as a recreational site the creation of whimsies off the clock at the end of the workday. This kind of creative energy allowed from not working is what we require to reimagine the systems around us. And I think many of us felt this hope and possibility with the stillness and space provided by the pandemic, even in spite of its horrors. So it's a proposal for less work and more play. So in the film End of Days, I tour the viewer around different angles of the Blue Hole at Manu-Muskin River Preserve. And it further details how the perception of the landscape is changed by systems and events, and shares both facts and folklore surrounding the Pine Barrens, the early glass industry, and sand mining. The choice to capture the landscape is inspired by one of my favorite filmic strategies in the original TV series, Scenes from a Marriage by Ingmar Bergman, which shows throughout each episode a very intimate and difficult relationship unraveling. And at the end of each episode, as a kind of respite from that, they would, during the credits, they would focus on the landscape really close up and then slowly zoom out on the Faroe Islands as a kind of like retreat or like palate cleanser. So I often think about this image of nature as a safe haven, as a privileged one, and how this definition of nature as a retreat is changed or challenged by the climate crisis. So ultimately, if there was like one way to wrap this up, I would say that End of Days is the first in what I hope to be a series of explorations into the materials and stories that shape our perception of both glass art and the glass industry.
Hey, thank you so much. One of my questions you just answered, you know, I kind of felt like this was going to be the case, but is this a point of departure for more work? Because myself, I like walk out of the gallery and continue to kind of ruminate and think about the ideas that you've presented. I see this as kind of a platform for more exploration.
Yeah, and I did think the video was like a test in a way. I imagined the script being much longer, and I felt like I was taking a shot at it when I edited what I had down. But beyond that, I do think about, you know, of course, setting my sights on gas and that its relationship to the landscape and raw materials in that way. So I feel like there's a lot of other points of entry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was really cool to see your work kind of goes from all different directions and points of view, like, you know, positioning, individual positioning in relationship to the material, you know, how we see it, what we don't see in it, you know, the ecological impact of harnessing this, like, kind of what we kind of assume is like an endless material, because silica makes up so much of our Earth's crust. We just kind of think it's just there and will always be there. You know, and then looking at it through the industrial history and the personal narratives of those working within that industry. And I just found it all to be very fascinating conversations between all of these, what some people would look at first as disparate parts, but this narrative like quickly pulls them all together into this really interesting web of information. Your dad was a glazer.
Yes.
Do you have conversations with him about silica and about silica sand? Has he been on any of your field trips to visit these ecologists or miners or anything?
No, I haven't thought to invite him, but I should.
Yeah.
I think in like the flurry of being having a new kid.
Yeah.
But I do think that would be really interesting. I mean, I've of course talked to him about like labor and like unions and work.
Yeah.
And then I like to hear stories about, you know, his experience working as a glazer. Yeah, I hadn't thought about pulling him in that way. So
Yeah. I think it's really neat the way you work. It seems like you're doing this deep investigation into these histories and materials, but then it really looks like you're drawing upon these very personal histories and stories from these characters you meet along the way. I'd really love to see more of your interviews with people, and you
Yeah.
know, maybe, you know, you can give us a glimpse into some of these experiences you've had, because they look like they've really made an impression on you, and your work's made an impression on me. So I thank you so much for being a part of this and putting together this really fascinating series of works for this exhibition in particular.
No, thank you, Kristen. And yeah, I do think that I that was like really my first kind of short video or film project. And so I do have, because the voices and the narration comes so much from verbal conversations, I do have aspirations to incorporate like actual people into future film projects. How to keep it, you know, a storytelling or poetry project and not full on documentary is the challenge, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what's next.
Thank you.
Again. So yeah, I just want to wrap up our time together here, and of course, invite anyone who has not yet come to see the exhibition to make their way over the Delaware Contemporary. Again, Through to Glass Darkly is up through the end of 2022. And make sure you do spend time in the Draper Gallery with Kristin's very thoughtful and thought-provoking end of days. And also, if you want to learn more about Kristen and her fascinating work, you can check her out on her website, www.KristenNevilleTaylor.com. And if you're watching this prior to the first weekend in November, I'd like to invite you to join us at the Delaware Contemporary for a special event taking place November 4th through the 6th. Beyond this being a great weekend to check out all the incredible works on display in the galleries, visitors on this particular weekend will also have the opportunity to watch live glass making demonstrations presented by the Corning Museum of Glass, who will be transforming the Delaware Contemporary's parking lot into a glass blowing studio. So you can find out full details about these exciting happenings on the Delaware Contemporary's website, and we hope to see you all over there real soon. Thanks again, Kristen, and thank you, John.
Thank you.